There comes a moment in every soul's journey where everything goes quiet, not the peaceful quiet of resolution, but the thick, paralyzing silence that echoes louder than screams. It's the silence that arrives after prayer turns dry, signs disappear, and divine guidance retreats like a tide pulling back before the storm. In that space, you're left with nothing, no voice, no signal, no sense of movement, just you and the unbearable stillness. And you wonder, did I lose it? Did I go too far? Did I misread the call that brought me here in the first place? But what if that silence isn't punishment? What if it's the holiest sound of all? You see, the greatest spiritual moments don't come wrapped in revelation, they arrive hidden in silence, disguised as abandonment. When the universe stops speaking, it's not because you've done something wrong. It's because you're standing too close to the answer for language to carry it. Because there are truths so sacred, they cannot be spoken without distortion. Silence is their container. Divine silence is not absence. It is transition. The moment you stop hearing the voice of the divine is often the moment you're being asked to become it, to carry what you once received into what you now embody. And that transformation is terrifying. You're not just leaving behind your comfort, you're shedding the skin of who you thought you were. It feels like being exiled, like walking blind through a desert you were sure would bloom. But this is the sacred space where identity dies and essence rises. This is the death of ego, the quiet crucifixion of the self who needed constant confirmation. When you no longer get validation from signs, numbers, dreams, or synchronicities, it's because the universe wants you to trust yourself more than its whispers. It wants you to know that the magic was never in the signs. It was always in your response. And when you reach this point, this holy silence, everything you thought you knew about God becomes irrelevant. Because now, you're not chasing God, you're becoming the stillness through which God speaks. Your faith must evolve from receiving to remaining, from following to embodying. And that requires silence. It requires trust without proof, belief without blessing, love without answer. That's when you know you're close. Not when things are loud, but when they fall silent. Because silence is not emptiness. It is concentration. It's the tightening of heaven's bow before it shoots you into the next chapter of your becoming. And in this chapter, you're not being led, you are being emptied, poured out of your old self, so the new one can rise. And the reason it hurts so much is because you're giving birth to a version of you that doesn't depend on noise. A version of you that doesn't pray just to hear back but prays because the prayer itself is sacred. A version of you that doesn't need signs to trust, because you've become the sign. You are now the living signal that something holy is unfolding, even when nothing is happening. And this silence is where the greatest growth happens. Because silence holds you accountable. It leaves you with no distractions, no affirmations, only your choices. It strips you of performance and puts your inner compass on trial. And if you listen closely, silence doesn't say you're lost. It says you're ready. You're ready to lead without being led, to love without being loved back, to move without applause, to trust without sensation. That's the final test before divine breakthrough. Can you walk forward when heaven stops talking? Because if you can, you pass into a different kind of alignment, one that is not based on spiritual highs, but on spiritual stability, where you no longer chase energy, you generate it, where you no longer beg for signs, you become stillness in motion. And that's why the voice of God disappears when you're closest to arrival. Because arrival isn't a place, it's a state. And silence is the sound of that state unfolding. It's the womb of your awakening. It's where the old you gets buried and the sacred you resurrects, not loudly, not grandly, but quietly, almost unnoticeably, like a candle flame reigniting in a windless room. And it's in that moment, when no one sees your pain, when no one claps for your discipline, when no angel appears to affirm your path, that you meet God, not in thunder, but in stillness. Because heaven hides in silence, not to punish you, but to see if you've learned how to see in the dark, to walk when you can't hear, to love when it's not returned, to believe when belief makes no sense. And those who endure this silence, their reward isn't always more answers. Sometimes it's just peace. Not the peace that comes when everything makes sense, but the peace that remains when nothing does. That is divine. That is holy. That is mastery. And when you reach that state, the universe doesn't need to speak, because now it speaks through you.